Okay, so this is the second review in a row where I'm recording it on the day of a massive coincidence. So the day that I'm recording this, you can see on the bottom right, is the 4th of January, which is the anniversary of Cast Revolver Part 1, aka the debut of the Fifth Doctor proper, after his regeneration in Legopolis. I swear I don't plan this. Hello ladies and gentlemen, my name is Mr. TARDIS, and welcome back as I try to make my way through the extensive Big Finish 2024 back catalogue. We now have a Fifth Doctor adventure, The Great Beyond, which is a six-parter written by James Kettle, featuring Peter Davison as the Fifth Doctor, Janet Fielding as Tegan, Sarah Sutton as Nyssa, and Matthew Waterhouse as Adric. And The Great Beyond, apart from competing for the award for Best Big Finish Cover of 2024, like, holy shit, this goes so hard, was hyped up a lot pre-release because The Great Beyond is a six-parter, and during the Fifth Doctor's tenure in the 1980s, he didn't have any six-parters. The majority of his stories were four-parters, there were some two-parters in there, and there was also the Five Doctors, which was its own thing, but The Great Beyond is a epic six-part story which takes place in The Great Beyond. So basically the Fifth Doctor, Tegan, Nyssa and Adric have landed in a galaxy where there was just a massive, huge cataclysmic conflict, a massive war between the Scarlet Threads and the Universalists. The war's over now, it doesn't really matter who won because the whole galaxy has been war-torn and mostly destroyed, and in order to preserve a incredibly tenuous and fragile peace, the Beyond has been set up as a intergalactic prison. It's this constantly shifting, constantly moving prison facility which is able to harbour these incredibly dangerous and powerful war criminals, and because something strange is going on inside of the Beyond, the prisoners long for death. Basically, they would rather long for the death penalty than spend any more time in the Beyond, and the Fifth Doctor, Nyssa and Adric are there to investigate, and Tegan starts the story off-world as essentially this strange soothsayer type person. Tegan spends most of the first episode with a freedom fighter, Nairobi Star Claire, played by Anna Critchlow, who wants to get into the Beyond to rescue her sister. And if you look at the cast list as well, we have a trio of Star Claire sisters. We've got Nairobi, we've got Alison, and we've got Ocean. We've also got Ivan, played by Philip Hurd Wood, who is the prison warden, the overseer, basically, but his grasp on reality is a little bit not there. But why does Tegan start the story separated from the Fifth Doctor and friends? Because there's some amnesia happening. There's a lot going on in The Great Beyond. It is a six-parter, but oddly enough, it's a story where there's a lot of lore. There's a lot of like pre-universe build-up, as in like the universe before the events of the story started with this intergalactic war. However, despite being a six-part story, it feels like The Great Beyond is the definition of a slow burn. It takes an awfully long time to get going, and even when it does get going, it feels like from episode to episode, from part to part, from cliffhanger to cliffhanger, not a lot seems to happen. I think that The Great Beyond would have been a very effective four-parter, and it feels like it's just a six-parter kind of for the sake of it.
I think the door isn't where it used to be. And these walls definitely feel like they're closing in.
I don't know.
Has anyone else noticed anything about the floor?
Should I be taking all of this down, Doctor?
Maybe just use your discretion.
You'd think that one good thing about being locked in a prison, at least you'd know exactly where you were.
The changes in here will be minor. Each individual cell seems to stay broadly coherent.
So the five of us stay together.
Oh, that's reassuring. Hold on, I think there's something amiss with your mathematics.
Where? Show me. I carried the four.
No, your mathematics, Doctor. You said five.
Could we have less noise? The squeaking of that chalk plays hell with the hangover I wish I was having.
Alison Starclair.
Don't shout it too loud or everyone will want one.
It's such a privilege to meet you, madam.
You're lucky. She hardly ever gets out of bed.
Adric, that's unkind.
And when she does, it's only to spend hours making herself up.
It's wasted on boys like you.
I think you look wonderful.
Well, I've been reading about you on the Society media for goodness knows how many years.
More than she lets on, I'll bet.
Adric.
But what are you doing here? You surely didn't get caught up in the war. I thought you lived a life of...
Unending self-indulgent pleasure. Well, one tries.
Miss Starclair has some unfortunate connections.
When the whole thing's too miserable to bore a new arrival with, make yourself comfortable, Mr. Fairfield. I hope you're executed.
What?
She said that before.
I thought it was just a sense of humour.
I don't like it.
Everything's turned upside down and beyond. Execution isn't something you avoid, it's something you go out of your way to cultivate.
It's a shame because I think that James Kettle is drawing on some really strong themes here. There's some great inspirations as well. I think the main one that he cites in the behind-the-scenes interview is the Christopher Priest novel Inverted World, which is about this slowly travelling city, which kind of sums up The Great Beyond without getting into too many spoilers. But in terms of just what The Great Beyond is and what its deal is, it's a bit predictable. I kind of predicted it as soon as they sort of established how the prison moves around and what happens on the inside. I kind of called it pretty early on, which means that when they figure out what's going on in part 4, it's like, oh, you Doctor, you didn't figure that out. You've also got these two robots which you see on the front cover. These are the princesses. These are these two robot drones which essentially keep order inside of the Great Beyond, but there's not a lot to order because despite this being a massive intergalactic prison that's absolutely massive, it's almost like planet-sized, but there's not a lot for them to do logistically inside of the Beyond because despite this being a massive intergalactic prison, the cast is relatively small and most of the prison's inhabitants have died or gone to a potential afterlife long before the Doctor even turns up. So it feels like a lot of storytelling potential, a lot of world building possibilities have kind of just been left on the table. We have to learn a lot of the world building information from the Starclare sisters, who are based off of the Mitford sisters in World War II. For those of you who don't know, the Mitford sisters, there were 6 sisters from this upper class family, 6 daughters and 1 son, and they had like comically varying political ideologies during World War II. Some of them were outright Nazis, some of them were communists and socialists, and it's an interesting approach to take for the Great Beyond because you've got the aftermath of this massive war, which could be an allegory for World War II, and then it's like, what do you do to pick up the pieces afterwards? But I don't think that subtext is really explored, and the sisters themselves, they're not given much in the way of compelling arcs over the course of the story because they're meant to be reunited in the story and then they learn to love each other despite their harsh and difficult upbringing and coming out the other end of a war. But because they spend, no joke, about 95% of their scenes together prior to part 6 of The Great Beyond just lambasting each other and trading pithy quips and insults at each other, I just didn't feel the turn at the end of the story. I think that part 6 in theory has a really lovely ending and a nice change of pace and setting for what's come before for the previous 5 episodes, but that part of it I don't think really worked. There's the interesting wrinkle in just how the Doctor got into Beyond, and there is like a brief flashback in part 3, I think it is, where they explain how the Doctor, Nyssa and Adric got inside the prison and how Tegan got to where she was at the start of the story, but it's like only a couple of scenes long, and I feel like you could have actually made that a whole episode in its own right to sort of explore how the Doctor got here, how he knew something was going wrong in the Beyond, whereas it's kind of glossed over here, which feels weird because it's kind of the inciting incident for the story and it doesn't feel developed. And that's strange because this is a 6-part story. I don't know about all of the other prior 5th Doctor adventures from Big Finish, but if this is the longest one or one of the longest ones, it doesn't feel like that in terms of its actual content. So much of the Great Beyond's structure is reliant on the setting, moving around, shifting the walls and absorbing people and then spitting them out somewhere else, and it's basically done purely to move people around to try and keep the pace up. It's not really informed by character or the plot, it's just, oh, we need an action scene, let's just spit Nyssa and one of the sisters out into this other location, and then when they're done, we'll just absorb them back in and spit them out somewhere. You can really feel like James Kettle thinking, how can I get to the next cliffhanger? Oh, Nyssa's not done anything for a while, or Tegan needs to do something here, let's just spit her out somewhere else. Oh, I've got this setting, which, it's a good utility from a writer's perspective to have a malleable setting like the Beyond, but it basically just feels like a get out of jail free card, like so many times, without the plot actually moving forward. There's a couple of cool cliffhangers, but when you think about it, when you go for example, the cliffhanger ending for part 3 and then the cliffhanger ending for part 4, it's like, okay, in those 25 minutes, what has been accomplished? And the answer for most of the episodes is little, which makes The Great Beyond, for the first 3 episodes, for the first half of it, it feels like a real drag. But then the second half of The Great Beyond, it starts diving into the themes a little bit more, we start fleshing out some of the characters a bit more, and we learn what the actual state of play is, how the Beyond works, what's functioning about it, and I was kind of worried that explaining what the Beyond was, how this prison functioned and how it operated, would sort of remove the Lovecraftian existential aspects from it. And I know that James Kettle also took inspiration from John Carpenter's work as well. And so much of John Carpenter's work relies on not explaining or not over-explaining the themes or the logistics of those stories. But for The Great Beyond, once it did explain what was going on, I personally did find it more interesting. I was thinking, okay, finally, we're actually moving. We're kind of, figuring out what's going on and how to get out of this predicament. We also have the concept here as well of the Forever, which is something that's around the prison which corrupts somebody and causes them to essentially become comatose. They lose all feeling except they are conscious and they can understand the passage of time, which is diluted where they are. Basically sleep paralysis or an out-of-body experience but on steroids. And it's a pretty harrowing and pretty nightmarish concept, but I think The Great Beyond didn't really explore it that much. Like, it's used occasionally to imbue a bit of horror into the story when it's, dragging a bit, which is quite frequently, but I kind of wish they dove into it a little bit more. One of the companions gets possessed by this at one point, and then they just sort of walk it off. The princesses are fun characters. One of them gets a crush on the Doctor, and Adric's reaction to that, Matthew Waterhouse played that really well. It was really funny. And I'll admit, The Great Beyond has some really strong dialogue, some really strong interpersonal moments, and some interactions between the main cast. But apart from that, I don't see why this had to be a Fifth Doctor, Adric, Tegan, and Nyssa story. Nyssa and Adric don't really have anything to do over the course of this story. It's really strange. It's really strange to have such a long runtime, have such a big TARDIS team, and feel like so little's actually happening in it. Honestly, I'm kind of struggling with what else to say about The Great Beyond. I'm a little bit confused myself as to how a story with a 3-hour runtime I don't have much more to say about it. There's some really, really great and strong ideas in there, and the cast are really good, but I've got to admit, Philip Hurd Wood in this story is kind of underserved, and I think Peter Davison as well gives a really strong performance, particularly in the last 2 episodes. It ends pretty strongly, but you've got to go through a whole 4.5 episodes to get to that point, and I don't really think it's justified. One of the recent selling points of the Third Doctor range recently from Big Finish has been, we're doing these 7-part stories which are reminiscent of season 7, like Ambassadors of Death and Inferno. We're doing 7-part unit stories, and that's bold, but it does come with a lot of risks where if you don't really engage with that story, then you're just kind of locked in there for 3 hours, and that nobody really wants to do that, especially when the price of entry for Big Finish Productions is pretty high. But one thing that the Third Doctor adventures have done to alleviate some of those concerns is that even though it is one big 7-part story, it will be split up into segments or very distinct acts with different settings and tones, and sometimes even supporting cast members. But for The Great Beyond, with the exception of the ending, doesn't really do enough to sort of break up the monotony of the Beyond. With the exception of a brief flashback as to how the Doctor and co got into that situation, which, like I said, I think that could have been a solid episode, maybe even 2 episodes on its own, to really build up the themes and the world building of this intergalactic war and how the Doctor got into Beyond. That's also an issue. It's meant to be this big impregnable prison, but it keeps spitting people out and absorbing people in. I don't know, if it kind of feels like you're just walking through one of those carousels at an office. I don't know, it's a bit too easy to get in and out of the Beyond, isn't it? Especially for a prison. And also, The Great Beyond ends on a cliffhanger. So they're going to be following this 6-part epic story in 2025 with a 12-parter called Hooklight. Part 1 comes out in April, and this is 6 parts, and then Hooklight Part 2, also 6 parts, comes out in May. So the next story for the 5th Doctor is a 12-parter. Okay, the cover looks amazing as well. Doesn't this look great? These look awesome. I want to emphasize, I did not have a bad time listening to The Great Beyond. I just passively listened to it for about 2 hours, and then it got pretty interesting in the final hour, but still compromised because I don't think it had really done the legwork beforehand to justify the character arcs and resolutions there. I personally wouldn't really recommend it, but I'm certain that out there, this is somebody's favourite Big Finish story of the year, or their favourite 5th Doctor adventure in the history of the franchise. I'm sure somebody out there exists who The Great Beyond is very specifically catered for. Unfortunately, though, while I appreciate what it was going for in terms of the themes, the structure and the pacing and some of the weak character work, it didn't justify it for me. It did not work for me. So yeah, so that's all of the Fifth Doctor stories for 2024. Let me know if you listened to The Great Beyond. Let me know in the comment section below. Or if you're looking forward to the 12-part Hook-Light story, which comes out in 2025, blimey. Be sure to like the video, subscribe if you want more Doctor Who Big Finish reviews, and I'll see you all next time.